First story, by Sarah Johnson. I had always considered myself street smart, living in a bustling city like New York for the past 5 years. But the events of that fateful night on the dark aisle near the Brooklyn Bridge shook me to my core, making me question my own judgment. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was heading back home after a late shift at the restaurant where I worked. I'd taken this shortcut along a narrow alley countless times before. It cut my commute time in half. It was a place I'd grown comfortable with, despite its eerie reputation for criminal activity. My friends often teased me about the risk I was taking, but I had never encountered any real trouble, so I dismissed their warnings. The alley was narrow, surrounded by aged brick buildings that towered high above. The streetlights, spaced too far apart, struggled to pierce the inky darkness that settled in the alley like a thick fog. The uneven cobblestone path made for uneven footing. That night, the usual backdrop of distant traffic noise was absent, and the eerie silence was unsettling. As I was about halfway through the alley, I heard faint footsteps behind me. I quickened my pace, trying to shrug off the discomfort. But the footsteps grew louder and more hurried, echoing off the walls like a haunting rhythm. I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw a man trailing behind me, his face obscured by a hoodie. My heart raced, and the chilling dread I'd felt was undeniable. I knew I had to do something, so I turned the next corner, hoping to shake him. To my horror, he followed my every move, closing in with each step. Panic took hold as I realized that this man wasn't just a stranger. He was pursuing me with intent. I picked up my pace, my footsteps echoing through the empty streets as I raced towards the nearest main road. But the footsteps behind me only quickened. I could feel his presence inching closer, his breathing becoming audible. In my desperation, I took a sharp turn down another alley, hoping to lose him. This time, the alley was even darker, and I stumbled over debris as I made my way deeper into its ominous depths. As I turned a corner, I finally saw a dim, flickering light coming from a partially open door. I dashed inside the building, my breath catching in my throat. The space was an old warehouse, cluttered with crates and forgotten equipment. I crouched behind a stack of crates and peeked through a crack, watching as the hooded figure entered the building, scanning the darkness for any sign of me. For what felt like an eternity, we were locked in a chilling game of cat and mouse, both of us breathing heavily in the dimly lit warehouse. I couldn't see the man's face, but I could feel his determination to find me. Just when I thought he was about to discover my hiding spot, I heard a distant siren approaching. The man hesitated for a moment, then turned and fled back into the night. I stayed hidden until the police arrived, and they took my statement. They told me that I had been lucky, that this alley had been a hotbed for muggings and worse in recent weeks. The whole incident left me shaken to my core, and I never took that dark aisle again. I've learned that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, even in the familiar shadows of the city. Second story, by David Harris. It was a cold winter night in London, and I had just finished a late shift at the hospital. I was tired, and the thought of getting home to my warm bed was my only comfort. But fate had other plans for me that night. I decided to take a shortcut through a narrow alleyway that I'd used many times before. It was the quickest way to get home, and I was in no mood to wander through the freezing streets any longer than necessary. The alley was eerily quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic and the occasional gust of wind. But as I walked deeper into the darkness, I began to hear something that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the faint sound of a woman sobbing. I stopped in my tracks, trying to locate the source of the crying. The narrow alley was devoid of any other souls, or so I thought. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate. My heart raced, and a sense of unease settled in. I couldn't ignore it, so I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing off the tall brick walls. I turned a corner and found her. A woman, huddled on the ground, her face buried in her hands, her sobs echoing through the alley. She was disheveled, her clothes torn, and she looked as though she had been through a horrific ordeal. Without thinking, I approached her and asked if she needed help. She looked up at me, her tear-stained face filled with a mixture of relief and fear. "Please," she whispered, "you have to help me. He's still out there." I offered my hand to help her up, and she clung to me, trembling. She explained that she had been walking home when a man had attacked her, dragging her into the alley. She had managed to escape, but the man was still lurking nearby, waiting for her to emerge. I knew we had to get out of there and find safety. We started to make our way back the way I had come, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel a malevolent presence lurking in the shadows. As we turned another corner, a man stepped out of the darkness. He was tall and menacing, his eyes cold and empty. He was the very person the woman had been fleeing from. He began to approach us, a sinister smile on his face, and it became clear that this was a dangerous situation. My adrenaline surged, and I knew I had to protect the woman. I pushed her behind me and stepped forward to confront the man. He advanced, and a gut-wrenching fear coursed through me. I had no weapon, no way to defend myself, but I couldn't back down. I had to protect her. Just as the man was about to reach me, we heard the sound of police sirens approaching. The man hesitated, then turned and fled into the darkness. The police arrived moments later, and we gave them our statements. The woman and I both escaped that alley that night, physically unharmed but forever haunted by the encounter. It was a chilling reminder that danger can strike when you least expect it, even in the heart of a bustling city like London. Third story, by Emily Martinez. I had always enjoyed exploring abandoned places, finding solace in the stories of the past that clung to their crumbling walls. So when I heard about an old, abandoned hospital in Detroit that was rumored to be haunted, I couldn't resist the urge to check it out. The hospital, named St. Jude's, had been closed for decades, a looming relic of a bygone era. The stories surrounding it were grim, filled with tales of ghostly apparitions and inexplicable sounds. The idea of encountering the supernatural intrigued me, and I set out one gloomy afternoon to explore the decaying building. The hospital was nestled in a desolate part of the city, its towering structure casting an ominous shadow over the area. The front entrance was barricaded with rusty gates, but I had come prepared with the tools to breach them. I entered the hospital, the air thick with the scent of decay and dampness. The interior was a labyrinth of dark hallways, shattered windows, and broken equipment. My footsteps echoed through the silent corridors as I ventured deeper into the abandoned facility. The place was like a time capsule, frozen in a state of disrepair. I was thrilled by the eerie atmosphere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I explored the upper floors, I began to hear strange noises, distant whispers, the creaking of floorboards, and an occasional faint cry. I brushed them off as the result of my overactive imagination, but the unease continued to grow. As I made my way down a long corridor, I stumbled upon a room that was different from the others. It was dimly lit, and I could see a flickering light coming from within. I cautiously pushed the door open, revealing a scene that would forever haunt my nightmares. Inside, I saw a group of people huddled around a makeshift altar. They were dressed in tattered clothes, their faces obscured by masks. In the center of the room lay a lifeless body, an eerie silence surrounding it. I was paralyzed with fear as I watched them perform a strange ritual, their voices chanting in an unknown language. I knew I had to escape, but the realization struck that I was trapped in the heart of this dark, sinister gathering. My every instinct screamed at me to flee, but my body refused to respond. I watched in terror as they raised their hands, a ritualistic knife gleaming in the dim light, poised to descend. Just as the knife was about to strike, the door behind me creaked open, and a brilliant beam of light flooded the room. It was the police, responding to a tip about suspicious activity in the abandoned hospital. The cultists scattered like cockroaches, leaving behind their lifeless victim. I was taken into police custody as a witness, and the cultists were arrested. The whole ordeal had been a nightmare, a real and horrifying experience in the heart of Detroit. It was a stark reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying stories are not of the supernatural, but of the darkness that can reside in the hearts of people. These stories serve as a chilling reminder that in the darkest corners of a city, the real horrors may not be supernatural, but the dangers that lurk in the hidden alleyways and abandoned buildings. Fourth story, by Jack Reynolds. It was a gloomy evening in San Francisco, and I was walking home from work. My office was located in the heart of the city, and I often took a shortcut through an alley to save time. The alley was narrow and lined with tall, aging buildings that seemed to lean in, blocking out the sunlight. As I entered the alley, I noticed a figure up ahead. It was a man standing in the shadows, his back turned to me. I thought nothing of it at first. It was a busy city, after all. But as I got closer, I began to hear a strange sound, a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. I slowed my pace, my instincts urging me to turn back. But something about the situation was so bizarre that I couldn't resist investigating further. As I approached the man, I realized that he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a pack of feral dogs, their eyes gleaming with a menacing hunger. The man turned to face me, and his appearance was equally unsettling. His clothes were torn and filthy, and his face bore a wild, crazed expression. He clutched a makeshift weapon in his hand, fashioned from a broken pipe. The dogs, led by this man, had formed an unholy alliance. Fear surged through me as I realized that I was trapped in the narrow alley, with no way to escape. The pack of dogs advanced slowly, their growls growing louder and more aggressive. The man grinned, revealing rotted teeth as he took a menacing step forward. I desperately searched for any means of defense, but there was nothing. I backed against the cold, unforgiving wall, knowing that I was trapped. The pack of dogs closed in on me, their eyes filled with a predatory hunger. I could see no way out of the impending attack, and panic overtook me. But just as the first dog lunged at me, a deafening siren echoed through the alley. It was the sound of a police car approaching, and it sent the dogs into a frenzy. They scattered, their unity broken, and the man with the makeshift weapon fled, leaving me shaken but alive. The police arrived moments later, and I recounted the harrowing encounter. They informed me that there had been a rise in attacks by feral dogs in the city, and cautioned me to be more vigilant in the future. The narrow alley had become a dark and dangerous place, where the real horrors were the threats of the city itself. Fifth story, by Mia Rodriguez. Chicago is known for its magnificent architecture and lively streets, but it also has its fair share of dark alleys. One night, after leaving a friend's party in the city, I found myself on one of these dimly lit, deserted paths. It was the shortest route to the subway station, and I'd walked it countless times without incident. However, that night would be different. As I ventured further into the alley, I began to feel a growing unease. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know someone is watching you, and it sent shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, trying to put the alley behind me, but the eerie sensation persisted. Out of nowhere, I heard the distinct sound of heavy breathing behind me. It was close, too close for comfort. I turned, my heart racing, and saw a figure lurking in the shadows. The man was tall and wore a tattered overcoat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. I stammered out a nervous greeting, hoping to de-escalate the situation. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, a chilling silence hanging in the air. Panic started to take hold as I realized that I was alone with this stranger in the dark alley, and his presence was anything but benign. Desperation urged me to make a break for it. I dashed toward the end of the alley, my footsteps echoing off the brick walls. The man followed, his heavy footsteps quickening. The sound of his boots clanging on the cobblestones fueled my fear. As I reached the end of the alley, I burst out into the open street, gasping for breath. I was in a well-lit area with people milling about, and the man had stopped following me. I rushed to a nearby police officer and explained what had just transpired. They immediately radioed for assistance and urged me to stay with them. A search of the alley revealed that the man had disappeared, leaving no trace behind. The police officers told me that this area had seen a rise in stalking incidents, and they were increasing patrols in the neighborhood. The unsettling encounter reminded me that even in a city as bustling as Chicago, the dark alleys held their own brand of terror. These stories serve as a reminder that the city's underbelly is not always what it seems. In the darkness of urban alleys, real and terrifying events can unfold, leaving an indelible mark on those who have encountered them. The horrors that hide in plain sight are often the ones that linger the longest, casting a shadow over the heart of the city. Sixth story, by Samuel Lewis. Atlanta, Georgia, a city of vibrant culture and southern charm, also has its fair share of hidden secrets and dark corners. One evening, as I was leaving a concert downtown, I found myself in one such dimly lit, eerie alley. The music from the concert still rang in my ears as I made my way through the narrow passage, thinking of the unique experience I'd just had. As I walked deeper into the alley, I noticed the graffiti-covered walls, which added a touch of urban art to the otherwise unremarkable space. But the further I ventured, the more I felt the atmosphere change. It was as if the air grew heavier, and the alley seemed to stretch on endlessly. The hum of the city outside was muffled, leaving me in an unsettling silence. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and a sense of dread crept over me. I began to hear faint whispers, like voices echoing through the alley. My heartbeat quickened as I tried to identify the source of these eerie murmurs, but I found no one in sight. As I proceeded, I noticed a series of odd symbols and markings etched into the brick walls, their meanings unknown to me. It was clear that the alley held a secret, something that I was not meant to discover. I considered turning back but was driven by an overwhelming curiosity. I turned another corner, and the alley seemed to change before my eyes. The walls appeared to close in, and the once familiar path had transformed into a labyrinth of twists and turns. Panic welled up inside me as I realized I was lost in this ever-shifting maze. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, and I spun around, my heart pounding. A group of people emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by eerie masks. They were dressed in dark, tattered clothing, and their presence sent a shiver down my spine. Without a word, they began to encircle me, their masks giving them an otherworldly appearance. My fear intensified as they closed in, their movements synchronized and deliberate. It was clear that I had stumbled upon something much more sinister than a mere alleyway. I tried to back away, but they moved closer, their intentions unknown. Just when I thought I was about to become a part of whatever dark ritual they were conducting, a distant siren pierced the silence. The group of masked figures hesitated, and I seized the opportunity to break free. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, the alley appearing to warp and twist, making my escape more difficult. The city's distant sounds grew louder, and I finally burst out into a well-lit street, gasping for breath. I found a nearby police officer and recounted my chilling ordeal. The alley I had ventured into was known for its mysterious occurrences, and the police assured me that they would investigate further. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something far beyond my understanding. In Atlanta, a city of rich history and contemporary life, it became clear to me that hidden horrors can lurk in the most unexpected places. The dark alleyways held secrets that I had only begun to glimpse, and I couldn't help but wonder what sinister mysteries were concealed within the city's shadows. Seventh Story, by Emma Turner. It was a rainy evening in London, a city known for its history and mystique. I had just left a cozy pub in the Soho district, feeling a bit tipsy after a couple of pints. The rain made the cobbled streets glisten, and I decided to take a shortcut through a dark, narrow alley that I had never explored before. As I walked deeper into the alley, I became aware of an unsettling sensation. The rain had grown heavier, and the ancient buildings on either side seemed to lean in, casting long, sinister shadows. The soft pitter-patter of the rain was the only sound, and I began to feel isolated and vulnerable. A strange noise caught my attention, a distant, echoing laughter that didn't seem to belong to any revelers in the nearby bars. I froze in my tracks, straining to locate the source. It was then that I noticed an eerie light at the far end of the alley, flickering like a dying flame in the distance. My curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously approached the flickering light. As I got closer, I realized it was a lantern, swaying gently in the rain, and beneath it stood a group of people huddled in a circle. They were dressed in tattered clothing, their faces hidden by hoods, and they swayed and chanted in an unnatural rhythm. I was paralyzed with a mixture of fear and fascination as I watched the eerie scene unfold. The people seemed lost in a trance, their chants growing louder and more chaotic. The alley was filled with an air of malevolence, and I knew I had to get out of there. As I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned back to see a man, cloaked in a long, hooded robe, blocking my path. His eyes were cold and unfeeling, and his presence sent a shiver down my spine. He was the leader of this strange gathering, and his intentions were far from benevolent. With a voice like a whisper in the dark, the hooded figure uttered cryptic words, and the group of people behind me closed in. I was surrounded, and the darkness of the alley seemed to press in on all sides. I had no choice but to confront the fear that gripped me. The group of hooded figures began to chant in unison, their words a garbled language I couldn't understand. As their chanting grew louder, I felt a surge of dread and energy that seemed to permeate the very air. It was as if the alley itself had come alive, and I was caught in the grip of a supernatural force. Just as I thought I was about to become a part of whatever dark ritual they were conducting, a loud clap of thunder echoed through the alley, accompanied by a blinding flash of lightning. The hooded figures scattered in disarray, their strange ceremony disrupted by the storm. I took my chance and ran as fast as I could, the rain soaking me to the bone. I burst out into a well-lit street, my heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. I knew that I had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than a rainy alley in Soho. The police were called, and they investigated the strange gathering I had witnessed. It was clear that the alley I had ventured into had a dark and mystical history, and I couldn't help but wonder what unspeakable secrets were hidden in the heart of London. In the ancient and enigmatic streets of London, I had come face to face with a mystery that defied explanation. The narrow alleyways, soaked with rain and steeped in history, held secrets that were far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Eighth Story, by Michael Anderson. I had always considered myself a night owl, and the allure of New Orleans at night had a special kind of magic. However, not all the mysteries of the city were pleasant. On one fateful evening, I found myself wandering into a dark and narrow alleyway in the French Quarter, an area known for its rich history and dark tales. The alley was bathed in shadows, the cobbled paths slippery from the earlier rain. The distant sound of jazz music played from a nearby club, and I felt a sense of unease as I ventured deeper into the alley. The oppressive humidity hung in the air, adding to the eerie atmosphere. It was then that I began to hear the whispers, soft, hushed voices that seemed to be carried on the wind. I couldn't make out what was being said, but the voices were unmistakably there, lurking in the dark corners of the alley. I turned to see if anyone was there, but the alley remained empty. As I continued, the whispers grew louder and more coherent, but the words were spoken in a language I couldn't understand. The disquieting feeling of being watched accompanied the voices, and I quickened my pace. The alley seemed to stretch on endlessly, and I felt as if I were descending into some otherworldly realm. The walls of the old buildings appeared to be closing in on me, making me feel trapped. I turned another corner, and I was met with an unsettling sight. A group of people was gathered in a circle, holding hands, and their heads were bowed in silent prayer. Their clothes were tattered, and their faces were obscured by shawls and scarves. The atmosphere was heavy with an otherworldly presence, and I was struck by the sense that I had stumbled upon something inexplicable. I tried to back away quietly, hoping to go unnoticed, but my foot slipped on a wet cobblestone, and I stumbled. The group of people turned their heads in unison to look at me, their eyes hidden behind the fabric of their garments. I could feel their gaze, and it sent a chill down my spine. The leader of the group, a tall figure draped in a flowing robe, extended a skeletal hand toward me. It was a gesture that conveyed both welcome and menace, and I knew I had to get away. Panic surged as I turned to run, but my path was blocked by the other members of the group. In a chilling and dissonant chorus, they began to chant words I couldn't understand, their voices filled with an unnatural resonance. The alley seemed to shift and twist, its walls writhing like living creatures. The very ground beneath me seemed to ripple, making my escape impossible. As I was about to succumb to the bizarre and unearthly force surrounding me, a sudden burst of music and laughter from a nearby street festival filled the alley. The group of mysterious figures faltered, their ritual disrupted. I seized the opportunity to break free and ran toward the safety of the well-lit street. Breathing heavily, I found a nearby police officer and recounted the strange encounter. They assured me that the alley I had wandered into had a reputation for unusual occurrences and mysterious gatherings. I couldn't help but wonder what dark secrets were hidden within the heart of the city of New Orleans. In the mystical and enigmatic streets of the French Quarter, I had come face to face with a mystery that defied explanation. The narrow alleyways, steeped in history and tales of the supernatural, held secrets that I had barely glimpsed, and I knew that the city held many more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Ninth Story, by Olivia Campbell. Boston, Massachusetts, is a city steeped in history, but it also has its share of enigmatic places, some hiding in plain sight. One chilly evening, after a late meeting, I decided to take a shortcut through a dimly lit alley in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, hoping to reach my apartment a bit faster. As I entered the narrow alley, I was immediately struck by the imposing, centuries-old buildings that lined the path. The atmosphere was heavy with a sense of history, and the dimly lit streetlights cast eerie, elongated shadows. It was a stark contrast to the bustling city I had left behind. The alley seemed to go on forever, and I began to feel like I had entered a different era. The old cobblestones, worn smooth by time, added to the feeling of being in a place out of time. My footsteps echoed through the silence, and I felt as if the weight of history itself was pressing down on me. Then I heard a distant sound, faint but distinct. It was the echoing of footsteps coming from the other end of the alley. I slowed down, looking back over my shoulder to see a figure approaching, shrouded in a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The figure moved with a slow, deliberate gait, their face hidden in the shadow. My heart quickened as the figure came closer. I had never seen anyone else in this alley, and the silence felt almost sacred. As the mysterious figure drew near, I could feel their presence. They were watching me, and the sensation sent shivers down my spine. I tried to quicken my pace, but no matter how fast I walked, the figure behind me maintained a consistent distance. It was as if they were mirroring my every step. The feeling of being pursued by an unknown presence was unbearable, and my fear continued to mount. Just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, the figure stopped following me and veered down a side street. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the unease remained. The alley seemed to go on forever, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I reached the end of the alley and emerged onto a well-lit street, my heart still pounding. I realized that the Boston I had left behind was worlds apart from the eerie and timeless alley I had just navigated. I couldn't help but wonder about the figure who had followed me and the secrets that the historic city held hidden within its ancient streets. In Boston, a city that straddles the past and the present, I had come face to face with a mystery that left me with more questions than answers. The narrow alleyways, filled with echoes of history, had held their secrets close, and I couldn't help but wonder what other enigmas lay hidden within the city's historic heart. 10th Story, by Daniel Mitchell. Seattle, Washington, is known for its picturesque landscapes and vibrant culture, but it also harbors its fair share of enigmatic corners. One evening, after leaving a friend's art gallery opening in Pioneer Square, I found myself wandering into a dark and hidden alley that seemed to exist in stark contrast to the city's modernity. The alley was narrow, enclosed by brick buildings that reached for the skies. The overhanging trees filtered the moonlight, casting dappled shadows on the cobblestone path. I had never ventured into this alley before, and it felt as though I had stepped back in time to a place untouched by the modern world. As I proceeded further into the alley, I became aware of a strange sensation. The temperature seemed to drop, and a cold, damp mist enveloped me, chilling me to the bone. The city's distant sounds grew muted, and I felt as though I had entered a realm of timeless silence. A soft, haunting melody filled the air, but there was no source I could discern. The eerie tune whispered through the alley, and I strained to catch the source of the music, but it remained elusive. The inexplicable sound only intensified my sense of unease. I rounded a corner, and that's when I saw it. A vintage gramophone, standing alone on a wooden crate, its horn casting a pale glow in the mist. The needle gently traced the grooves of a vinyl record, producing the ethereal melody that had been haunting the alley. As I approached, the gramophone abruptly stopped. I reached out to examine it, but a voice from the shadows startled me. A figure, dressed in an old-fashioned suit and hat, emerged from the darkness. His face was obscured by shadows, but his presence was undeniable. He told me he had been waiting for someone, waiting for me. He explained that the gramophone had a history, a connection to a bygone era, and that I had stumbled upon something of great importance. My curiosity piqued, but my apprehension remained. The man shared an old story, a tale of a love lost to time, a tale woven into the melody played on the gramophone. He urged me to stay and listen, to become a part of the story. But the enigmatic allure of the alley was overshadowed by the lingering feeling that something unnatural was unfolding. As the story played out on the vintage record, I couldn't shake the sensation that the past and present were colliding in a hauntingly beautiful and eerie manner. The allure of the gramophone, the melody, and the stranger's tale tugged at me, but a lingering sense of unease compelled me to leave. As I departed the alley, the man remained in the shadows, the gramophone's melody fading into the distance. The enigmatic encounter left me with a sense of melancholy and wonder, as I wondered about the timeless stories that the city of Seattle held hidden within its hidden corners. In Seattle, a city known for its blend of nature and modernity, I had ventured into a place that seemed suspended in time, and I couldn't help but wonder about the mysteries that awaited discovery in the city's enigmatic alleyways. Thank you for joining us for the whole video. That video you see on screen is one of my favorite. Check it out. If you've enjoyed these horror stories, show your support by hitting the subscribe button. Did this tale send chills down your spine? Let me know in the comments.